Hello, and welcome to another Oklahoma Public School Resource Center webinar presented by the Teaching and Learning team. My name is Jean Potter, and I will be your host for today. My co-host, Jeff Pritchard, who is the real expert on NWEA reports, is unable to join us for the day. If you tried to start the other webinar, my apologies. There were some technical issues. I was getting feedback. So we had to move to this URL, and this is the one that will be posted, and I will share that information with everyone. Today, our topic for conversation is the NWEA Summary with Quadrant Chart. This report is extremely useful because it gives you a visual way to look at the progress that a class is making as a whole, but it also gives you the opportunity to hone in on individual student growth. Because it is a growth report, you will have to have at least 2 assessments that have been given before you will be able to see it. Let's take a look at it now. So I'm going to switch over to screen share. Hold on just a moment. You should be able to see my screen now. If you want to, when you get ready to access the NWEA Summary with Quadrant Chart, you're going to go at it the same way that you do for all of the others. Log into your NWEA account, click on View Reports and Map Reports. And the one we're interested in today is the Summary with Quadrant Chart. It is for one class only. So let's take a look at it. The first thing you're going to need to do is to make sure that you have the correct fall or the correct term that the students were rostered in the term tested. For our purposes today, because if we want to see past performance, we're going to look at spring 2015-2016, and the testing term would be the same. Again, as a reminder, if you've not watched some of the other webinars, you will see something somewhat different. This is a demonstration site that we can get to. Yours will have specifics for your school or for your district, depending on the kind of setup you have. I'll choose the school and the teacher and the class. There's only one class. And I am going to go ahead and choose from fall 2015 to spring 2016. So I can look at growth between the fall and spring assessments. Norm reference data, the only one they have right now is 2015, so you don't need to worry about that. And I'm going to click Report, or click Create Report. The first thing you're going to see is up at the top, and you can check to make sure that you put all of the information in correctly, that you have the right terms. If you don't have, you can go back and change that by clicking easily by clicking on the Edit Report Criteria. One of the things that it does show is the growth comparison period and even the weeks of instruction. So in this case, the first test was given the 4th week of school, and then the end test was given the 32nd week of school, so that you can see how much growth you would probably expect. Now, let's go ahead and look at the report. The report gives a visual representation of assessment data comparing the 2 chosen assessments that you're looking at. Let me scroll down just a little bit. So across on the x-axis is the achievement percentile, and on the y-axis, or the vertical axis, is the conditional growth percentile. And we'll talk a little bit more about those, but essentially we're looking at how much they achieved as far as their actual scores, and we're looking at how much they grew. Over at the other side, you can see that there are some choices. When you first log in, unless you have clicked this Show Quadrant Colors and turned it off, you're going to see colors of quadrants. The top one is labeled, so you can see that it is low achievement and high growth. And if I click on it, I can see just that quadrant. The quadrant below, which is kind of a pinkish red, is low achievement and low growth. The one over here, the green one, high achievement and high growth. And finally, the yellow one, high achievement and low growth. A quick look at the quadrant in my example shows the relative number of students in each quadrant, but I can adjust the settings so that I can make it a little easier to read. So right now you can see that I have one student that's hovering down here in the high achievement, low growth. I have 3 students that are in low achievement and low growth, and then I have a couple, 3 borderline, but most of the students have at least grown quite a bit, and many of them are also achieving at high achievement scores. If I want to change my view a little bit, I can change it to show the student names. To me, this makes it a little more difficult to read, so I usually leave it off. I can choose to show only mathematics or only reading or only language. At this point, I think I'm going to choose just math. I can choose to show either all of my students are just male or female. I can also look at the ethnicities, and so each time I change one of these, if I want to change my point shape, I can look at this. I'm now showing all of these are math scores, but I have separated them out by ethnicity, or I could separate them by gender. So your view is it's very interactive, very easy to go ahead and see what is going on. So if I look at one of these and I would like to know in this case who it is that is hovering here, I can hover right over the score or over the data point. When I click on it, then it gives me a very quick abbreviated view of what the student's achievement is. So looking at this, I can tell, if I click it, the X, I can close that out, so I can hover over anybody's name and find out a short view of what they have been able to accomplish in the last year. But if I want more specific information or more detailed information, I will scroll down to the chart, which is below the quadrant. So I just simply scroll down. This is the chart that it shows, and let's take a look at this chart also, or at the table. Reading the table from left to right, the first thing I see is the student name and the student ID number, and also which quadrant their results are in for mathematics. I see the grade that they were in when the assessments were taken, and I see the date of the last assessment. And as you can see, I don't have to give that assessment on the same day. Sometimes there'll be a day when you have a student out or you don't have enough computers, so you can spread that out a little bit. I can also click on any of these and sort by that column. So in this case, I sorted by quadrant. I can sort by ID, last name, ID. I can sort by the grade, if they were all the different grades, or I can sort by the days they took the quiz, or the assessment. Excuse me, it is really an assessment. Let's look at the next column over. This gives their RIT score for both the fall and the spring. So this one was given in the fall. Throughout the rest of the year, as instruction has occurred, then we do another assessment in the spring. If you look at their RIT scores, the ones in bold are their actual RIT score with the standard deviation on either side. So Krista had a RIT score of 228 in the fall, and she had raised it by the spring assessment. She had earned up to 247. So those are pretty self-explanatory. I can easily find those. But let's look on over at the next section, which is called growth. So it's divided into 2 sections. We're looking at the growth section. The first column you see is the projected RIT. The projected RIT is calculated based on the performance of students nationwide that had the same RIT score and an equal number of weeks of instruction between the 2 assessments. The projected growth then, let me scroll back up just a little bit so you can see, the projected growth then is how much growth they think should have occurred based on statistics. So according to statistics, Krista should have moved from 228 to a projected RIT of 238 by the time she took the spring test. Observed growth, however, was 19. So that's what she actually scored, the difference in what she scored the first time and the last assessment. Next to that is the observed growth standard error. I'm not a statistician, but basically, if there's a statistical concern that the growth measurement might be invalid, this program will actually flag the data so that you can check the growth using other measurements like classroom observation, assessments, your own assessments, etc. The growth index is a measure of how much growth has occurred. If it's a zero, that means that the growth that occurred was exactly what was expected. Anything above zero, so a positive number, means that the growth was greater than they predicted. And anything below zero means that the growth was less than they predicted. And in this case, everybody made at least the projected amount of growth. The last two columns allow you to compare the growth of students at different levels of achievement. For instance, two students with the same conditional growth index have shown similar growth, even though their RIT scores may have been somewhat different. So if I'm looking at Lisa here, and I'm looking at Isaiah here, I'm looking at Angelo here, they have somewhat different RIT scores, but their growth is pretty similar. The conditional growth percentile translates this data into percentiles, where a conditional growth index of 0, which means, again, remember that they met the expected growth, is equal to a percentile of 50. And using both of these, you can look at the growth of how, you can look at two students who have a different RIT score, but you can see that their growth is comparable. Okay, so let's look at a little more in depth of this. We looked at Krista for a moment, so let's go down here and look at Warren. Warren had a RIT score in the fall of 220. He had a RIT score that he achieved in the spring of 230. His projected RIT was 230, which was an increase of 10 points, and that's exactly what he got. So he is right on level with what was expected. However, because of statistics, this one is one that you might want to keep an eye on, because it could be a little bit off on because of the standard error. Let's look at another one. Actually, let's go back up. Remember that we can do this. I'm going to switch from mathematics, and let's see what reading looks like. Let's look at reading. Let's look at Bryn Juarez. Bryn is a high-achieving student, but he didn't grow very much as expected. He didn't grow as much as expected in the test. So let's look at Bryn. Bryn started out at 218, and he only went up 1 point in his RIT score, which is that they expected that he should go up at least 5 points. So his actual growth index is a -4, because he was 4 points below what they expected. And so what I can do using this information is to realize that Bryn may be achieving at a very acceptable level, but for some reason he didn't grow as much as expected. Let's look at another one. Well, let's look at how Krista did. Krista in English, or in reading, went from a 206 to a 214. I mean, they expected her to get to 212. Her projected growth then was 6 points, the difference between these two data points, and her observed growth was 8. So again, she exceeded the growth expected, but again, this is one that is, because of standard error, could be somewhat in question, and you would want to make sure, looking at your other data, that she really is progressing at what you would expect. So I move on down, the summary data by subject. This tells us a little bit about the class as a whole again. So 93, almost 94% of the students met or exceeded the projected RIT in reading. The count of students with growth projection. So there were 16 that started out, or that we have both beginning and ending terms scores. We have 15 that met or exceeded their as a count, which goes back up to looking at this. So 94% are 15 out of 16. And then basically looking at the quadrant chart and the table as a whole, teachers and administrators can see at a glance the proportion of students in each quadrant, and you can kind of check to see how each class is doing just by glancing at it. Students in the low growth and the low achievement section are obvious concerns, but students who are high achievers but show little growth also may need interventions to find out why their growth did not occur or was not measured. The obvious goal is high achievement, high growth, but this report also allows a celebration of students who are demonstrating growth even though they may not be achieving at optimum levels. Once these patterns are identified, users can begin to focus on the actual growth data for individual students based on their RIT scores. Using the data on growth can help us understand general trends, but teachers can now return to the class breakdown goal reports and begin to focus on specific goals. Using both the goal and growth information, teachers and students can prepare growth plans based on specific strengths and weaknesses. Teachers can then focus instruction to provide remediation or whether they need to go ahead and introduce new skills to meet the needs of all of their students. For a more in-depth look at NWEA, OPSRC is hosting a full two-day workshop two full-day workshops in October. On October the 26th, the topic is applying reports, and on October the 27th, the topic is informing instruction. Both days will be presented by NWEA representatives who will have lots more information and tips. For more information, you can find, and to register, you can go to opsrc.net. Click on 4 schools at the top and then on upcoming events. Because October the 27th is also the date of our next webinar, we're going to reschedule the webinar to avoid any conflicts. I'll send out updates in my newsletter. I hope this overview of the summary with Quadrant Chart has been helpful. If you were unable to use the chat feature in the live stream, please leave comments or questions in the comments section or email me at jean.potter@opsrc.net, and I'll look for the answers you need. Thanks for stopping by. This is Jean Potter from the Oklahoma Public School Resource Center. Have a great day.